If you're somebody who has shoulder pain when they're doing flat bench press, incline bench press, decline bench press, or any kind of dumbbell variation, then you should probably watch the rest of this video. When we're looking at the bench press, any type of pressing movement, we have three main contributing factors that are likely leading to you having shoulder pain when you're doing the exercise. And it has something to do with your spine, your scapula, or your shoulder. So what we're gonna do is put us through three different potential exercise options that may be a contributing factor in why we're having issues when we're doing any type of bench press. And we are gonna work on our spine extension first. So as we're doing a flat bench, incline bench, decline bench, any type of pressing movement, we need to be able to extend our thoracic spine. And so what we're gonna do is do something called an EQI, an eccentric quasi-isometric for spine extension. When we're doing an EQI for spine extension, what it's gonna look like is we're gonna have you just simply laying on the floor like this. You'll see a lot of people doing, say, like cobra poses in yoga to stretch spine extension, but all that's doing is really stretching us into lumbar extension as opposed to thoracic extension. So what we're gonna do for the EQI so that we have an active component to making our spine work better on our pressing movement is we are going to do an isometric hold in spine extension like this. And so as I'm sitting here in this position, all I am doing is trying to contract my thoracic spine extensors. So I'm feeling my spine shorten, the back side, the posterior side of my spine squeezing in an effort to hold myself up. The further up I go, the more tension I'm gonna drive in my lumbar spine, which again isn't wrong, it's just different. But if we're trying to bias our thoracic spine so that we can get our chest in front of our shoulder as we're pushing, as opposed to our, say, our lumbar spine. When we're laying on the floor in this position, I want you to think, are my ribs touching the floor? And I am pulling my sternum away from the floor without losing too much contact with my ribs. So I'd be looking for the bottom side of your sternum to be on the ground and the upper part of your rib cage. And then you're gonna be extending from there in an effort to contract the backside. The reason that that is so important when we're doing our benching is if we're attempting to be in spine extension as we're doing the movement pattern, if the backside of our thoracic spine can't shorten and can't contract properly, then we're gonna have a very hard time maintaining that position and allowing our scapula to move freely around our rib cage because our spine can't maintain full extension. Another thing we can do if that's a little bit too easy for somebody is we can load that position as well. This isn't something that we would do very heavy at all, but the idea is that we could have like a 20-pound bar and load extension even further. So initially what I just did was with my body weight, and for a lot of people that's probably gonna be enough. But if you're someone who's a little bit more advanced, a little bit stronger, has a harder time finding their spine, adding additional load may be a good way for you to kind of initiate a deeper contraction in the right tissue. And so what that's gonna look like is we're gonna put the 20-pound bar on our back, and again, gonna peel up off the floor, and I'm finding my thoracic spine, my upper back in between my shoulder blades, contracting to hold myself up. And as I run this through the set, I will feel myself starting to fail like this. What we want to do is continue to peel up off the floor. That's what makes this an EQI. It's an eccentric quasi-isometric. So I'm holding this isometric until I begin to fail and it begins falling into an eccentric. So it's ultimately a failing isometric. So you're holding this position for as long as you can until you no longer can manage that range of motion and the set is over. The point of an EQI is to take one set as far as we can to absolute tissue failure and being done with it. So you shouldn't require that much volume. One or two really good rounds of that and really contracting and finding the backside of your thoracic spine will go a very long way in having carryover to our bench press variations, whichever one you decide to choose, whether it's flat, incline, decline, this applies to all of them. So again, we just went over spine extension, the ability to extend our thoracic spine to like flare our rib cage. And how does that apply to the bench press specifically so that we can see it in this context is everyone says chest up, but that often gets misconstrued with lumbar extension, where like they're extending at their lower back and not at their thoracic spine, which it's not entirely wrong to be extending at the lumbar spine. But the problem is most people are overextending at the lumbar spine and they're not extending at the thoracic spine almost at all. And so if our backside of our thoracic spine, our posterior thoracic spine can shorten properly, I'm gonna be able to maintain this chest upward position a whole lot better, which will allow for my scapula to freely move into retraction and a bit of protraction and able to glide freely around my rib cage as we're doing the exercise, which takes us into the next drill we're gonna do, which is gonna be scapular rotation. So when we're looking at how our scapula rotates, as we push and use our upper arm, our scapula has to move with our humerus so that they can work interdependently as one unit, as one cohesive unit. So what we're gonna do is a bit of a scapular rotation axial car. So what you're gonna do is lay on your side, and as you lay on your side, you're gonna put your arm in horizontal abduction like this. As I'm putting my arm up to the roof, I am going to externally rotate my upper arm, my humerus. I'm gonna rotate it away from me, behind me. And as I rotate my humerus, I'm looking to feel my shoulder blade tucking. And then as I internally rotate, I am feeling my shoulder blade glide upward. So my scapula is rotating upward as I internally rotate my upper arm, my humerus. And then as I externally rotate, my scapula is tucking, almost depressing in a manner as I go ahead and fully externally rotate. It's very important for us to make sure that we're tensing, we're squeezing our fists so that we're irradiating tension, and I can feel the backside of my shoulder capsule contracting, as well as my shoulder blade kind of tucking downward, which should be the depressed motion that we would see at the bottom of the bench press. Again, I'm internally rotating, and I'll feel my scapula pulling upward as I fully internally rotate my arm. And then I externally rotate, and I feel my scapula tucking as I externally rotate my arm. And so the point of this, again, is we have ourselves in horizontal abduction, which is basically the same position that we would be in when we're bench pressing. And all we're trying to do is get our scapula to come up and getting our scapula to press down. But it's very important for us to be in this position as opposed to sitting upright in this position, because if we internally rotate our arm and feel our scapula hike up, we are actually elevating our scapula and we're not upward rotating. And that's because gravity is pulling down on my arm and my scapula has to elevate and not upward rotate to fight the resistance of gravity with the weight of my arm. So if we put ourselves on the floor in this position, there is no effect of gravity on my body, and I'm able to let my scapula rotate upward with internal rotation of my humerus, and gravity's having no effect on the resistance curve, so I can appropriately depress and downward rotate my scapula as well. And so if we're gonna apply this as part of your warm-up routine, as part of your internal training for your bench press, it's probably a good idea to sit somewhere between like a 10 and 15 rep range and developing really good internal awareness as to how's my scapula moving with my upper arm, so that again, that they can work interdependently as we go ahead and we bench press. So how does that apply to the bench press itself? So first we went ahead and we did spine extension, working on the back side of our thoracic spine. And then we went ahead and worked on how well is the scapula rotating as we go ahead and do the movement pattern of a horizontal bench press. And so just like we talked about with our spine, if the spine can maintain extension, as I'm pushing, we need the scapula to be able to move freely and sort of glide around our rib cage. And if our scapula can't internally rotate and our humerus can't internally rotate, we're not gonna be able to shorten our pec, contract our pec. If our scapula and humerus can't externally rotate, we're not gonna be able to lengthen our pec. And so again, the idea is that we would initiate with spine extension, thoracic extension, my chest is to the roof. I'm feeling my upper back contracting to maintain thoracic extension, and that should allow my scapula to glide freely so that I can fully reach up to the roof and feel my pec shortening, my pec contracting, and my scapula can depress and downward rotate and tuck so that I can feel my chest stretching and no pulling on the front side of my shoulder joint itself, my capsule. And so if the scapula can move freely through that range of motion, then it's gonna be a lot easier for our shoulder to do its job through the range of motion as well, which takes us into the third part of the series. So we did the spine, we did the scapula, and then the next part would be working on our shoulder and how well does that internally and externally rotate. So after we do our spine and our scapula, the next part to work on would be how well does our shoulder work as we're doing a bench press. Fundamentally, when we're doing a bench press, we need our shoulder to be able to internally and externally rotate. But let's say we have not a lack of range of motion issue, but we have a stability issue in our shoulder. And our shoulder doesn't know how to withstand load in a stable environment along with our scapula. So what we're gonna do is use a band and a kettlebell to create an unstable environment for our shoulder to work in. That should have the most application to doing the bench press. So for this drill, we could do this for stability of internal or external rotation of our shoulder. And it all depends on where we're placing the kettlebell relative to our upper arm. So again, we have our arm in horizontal abduction, which is gonna have the most carryover to the position we're in when we're actually bench pressing. So we're not doing it, say, overhead. We're not doing it with our arm behind us. We're doing it in the zone of that our shoulder is actually working in when we're doing a flat bench press. So for the drill, we have a resistance band, we have the kettlebell being suspended underneath, and you could see right away, I am involuntarily shaking, trying to maintain this position. So the kettlebell is trying to externally rotate me, and I have to maintain and stabilize my internal rotators to keep this position as I'm walking. We could also go ahead and bring our arm in front of us to be in more adduction, and bring our arm to our sides. There isn't one way to do this. And the idea is that I'm tensing my upper arm, I'm contracting my bicep and tricep, and I'm just trying to maintain this position as stable as I can in an environment that is intentionally unstable. So just like how we can do that with an internal rotation bias, we can do it with an external rotation bias as well. So I have the band and the kettlebell in front of my arm. It wants to internally rotate, and I have to externally rotate to maintain the position I'm in. And as I'm walking, I'm trying to watch for flaring of the rib cage. I'm still contracting my upper arm, my bicep and tricep. I'm co-contracting both. And I'm trying to maintain as much external rotation as I can with the band and the kettlebell creating an insane amount of instability. But what do we do if we feel like it's not a stability issue for our shoulder and it's a range of motion issue? So we don't have the ability to internally rotate or have enough range of motion to externally rotate our shoulder, then a stability drill like this might not be applicable to you. I can link a couple videos in the bio of this video that can go over expanding range of motion for both internal and external rotation, which you may need as well in conjunction with stability work. But again, if we don't have enough capsule space, enough shoulder capsule space to do this exercise, then we may need to go ahead and do passive stretching, isometric contractions, eccentric loading, and not exactly being worried about stability like this, okay? It's not gonna make up for a lack of range of motion. This is another element of joint health and function that comes after we have enough range of motion that's established as well. So we have no anatomical restrictions that are actually keeping us from moving. Stability would be the next domino to fall in that sequence. So we worked on the spine, we worked on the scapula, and we worked on the shoulder. We have two more pieces to the puzzle in a bench press, and that would be the elbow and the wrist. Although most elbow issues don't cause any shoulder pain when we're doing any exercise, they're usually shoulder issues that cause elbow pain. It's important for us to warm up our elbows. So what does warming up our elbows look like? So when we're doing an elbow car, it's very similar to the knee car in that our elbow flexes, extends, but it also rotates. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna contract our bicep and tricep. We're flexing our upper arm, creating tension. I am fully flexing my elbow and supinating. I'm thinking pinky over elbow, and then I'm straightening my elbow into full extension. I go ahead and I rotate my forearm, and I come back up and I flex my elbow. I rotate my forearm, extend my elbow. Flex my elbow, pronate the forearm, extend the elbow. And so when we're looking at doing the elbow cars, I want to make sure that we're maintaining full supination. We pronate, extend, flex, supinate, extend. So I come up and I'm squeezing my bicep. I'm thinking pinky over elbow. I'm trying to close this gap as much as we can. We rotate and then extend. And so moving our elbow through its full range of motion is probably good practice because it is a contributor to the flat bench press and any bench press for that matter. The other piece of the puzzle is the wrist. And although wrist cars alone may not clear up all of your wrist issues, if you're having issues when you bench press, it's the least you could do and the baseline starting point that we would do for addressing any wrist mobility practices. So we're gonna go ahead and try to move our wrist independently of our elbow. So you won't see me doing this, where my elbow is pronating and supinating instead of my wrist actually moving. So the idea is that I am going to fully flex my wrist. I'm gonna adduct my wrist. I'm gonna extend my wrist, abduct, and flex. We're gonna abduct, extend, adduct, and flex. And I don't want to see your hand cupping. That's your fingers doing the work rather than your wrist. We can also do the same thing in pronation so that it's a little bit more applicable to the positioning we'll be in when we're actually bench pressing. So I have my forearm pronated downward. I flex my wrist, adduct my wrist, extend my wrist, abduct the wrist, flex the wrist. So it's probably good practice to do a couple variations of wrist cars with the fist closed, the hand open, with the palm up to the roof and the palm down to the floor, along with a couple rounds of elbow cars, just so that we're checking that box off and we know no stone that's unturned when we're gonna do our flat bench press. So if we're gonna put all these pieces of the puzzle together, our starting position, again, is thoracic extension. I'm extending from my upper back. My sternum is being pushed to the roof with my chest being in front of my shoulder, my front delt. I align my hands on the bar as I'm extending, and as I unrack the weight, I am maintaining thoracic extension, and I am allowing my shoulder blades to come together and pull apart as I push upward. So my scapula is moving freely around my rib cage as I'm actually pushing the bar. And so if our spine can maintain extension, if our scapula can move freely, and our humerus can move and be stable under load, then most likely you will have no issues as you go about your bench press. But that's not to say that there couldn't be more contributing factors that are holding you back as you do the movement. So we only went over a handful of exercise options that may actually fix your problem, but it's a lot more complicated than that, and it's very circumstantial. So there might be some people that have plenty of spine and scapula function, but their shoulders are really messed up, and that's what's limiting them. There are other people that their shoulders and their scapula move great, it's their spine that's limiting them. So again, it's case by case, it's circumstantial and dependent on the individual. These are a couple tools that you can work on in the meantime that would likely help you execute your bench press a little bit more productively.